The scrapyard stretched for kilometers across the abandoned battlefield of Kepler 442b, a graveyard of twisted metal and scorched earth, where three different alien species had once fought for control of the planet's rare mineral deposits. Now, 2 years after the last shot was fired, only scavengers remained to pick through the bones of war. Elena Vasquez crouched beside a crater the size of a small house, her weathered hands sifting through debris with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent months learning to identify valuable salvage. At 19, she had already seen more destruction than most humans would witness in a lifetime, but the war had ended before she was old enough to fight in it. Instead, she had become something else entirely, a collector of the remnants left behind. Her backpack clinked softly as she moved, filled with spent ammunition casings from a dozen different weapon systems. The Zephyrian pulse rifle cartridges were worth good money to traders, and the crystalline power cores from Vorthan energy weapons could keep her fed for weeks. But it was the human ammunition she treasured most, not for its value, but for what it represented. Each brass casing told a story of humanity's refusal to surrender, even when outnumbered 10-1. The morning sun cast long shadows across the battlefield as Elena approached a particularly dense cluster of debris. Here, the remains of a human firebase had been overrun during the final days of the conflict. Broken barricades and melted armor plating created an abstract sculpture of humanity's last stand on this world. She had been avoiding this section for weeks, knowing it would be emotionally difficult to search through the remnants of her own species' sacrifice. A glint of metal caught her eye, and Elena carefully excavated what appeared to be a sniper's nest. The position had been expertly camouflaged, built into the natural rock formations with such skill that it had remained hidden even after the battle's end. Inside, she found something that made her breath catch in her throat. The rifle was unlike anything she had ever seen. While clearly of human design, it incorporated technologies that seemed decades ahead of standard military equipment. The barrel was nearly 2 meters long, crafted from some kind of adaptive metal that seemed to shimmer in the light. More intriguingly, scattered around the position were hundreds of spent casings unlike any in her collection. Each casing was nearly twice the size of a standard rifle round, etched with precise markings that indicated distances: 2,100 meters, 2,847 meters, 3,156 meters. Elena's hands trembled as she realized what she was looking at. These weren't just any spent shells. They were a record of impossible shots, each one representing a kill at a range that should have been beyond human capability. As she carefully collected the casings, a piece of paper caught her attention, tucked beneath the rifle's bipod. The handwriting was neat, precise, written in the steady hand of someone who had never doubted their ability to hit any target they chose. "To whoever finds this gear," the note read, "my name is Staff Sergeant James Morrison, 1st Battalion, Royal Marine Commandos. I've been fighting on this rock for 8 months, and in that time I've made 347 confirmed kills at ranges the aliens thought were impossible for human weapons. The longest was 3,924 meters, close to 4 kilometers. They kept trying to stay outside our effective range, never understanding that humans don't accept limitations the way other species do." Elena felt a chill run down her spine as she continued reading. "If you're human and you understand what these casings represent, then you know what we're capable of when we refuse to quit. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead, but my rifle is still here. Maybe someone else can push that record even further. Maybe someone can reach 4,000 meters." The note was signed with coordinates and a date from 3 weeks ago. Elena looked around the position with new eyes, noting the careful arrangement of equipment, the precise angles of the firing positions. This wasn't just a sniper's nest. It was a laboratory where a human had been pushing the boundaries of what was possible. She picked up the rifle, surprised by its weight and balance. Despite its advanced design, it felt familiar in her hands, as if human ingenuity had simply enhanced what had always been there rather than replacing it entirely. The scope was a hybrid system that combined traditional optics with some kind of alien targeting technology, probably salvaged from the battlefield, and modified to work with human equipment. As Elena examined the weapon more closely, she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. Mounted alongside the main scope was a smaller device she recognized from her salvage work, a Vorthan rangefinder, capable of accurately measuring distances up to 5 kilometers. But this one had been modified, its alien interface replaced with human controls and displays. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Staff Sergeant Morrison hadn't just been a sniper. He had been an engineer, an innovator who had taken the best of alien technology and adapted it for human use. Each shot he had taken had been an experiment, pushing the limits not just of his own skill, but of what human weapons could achieve when enhanced with captured technology. Alina found herself thinking about her own situation. For months, she had been content to simply collect the remnants of war, to gather the spent casings that represented other people's courage and sacrifice. But holding Morrison's rifle, reading his challenge, she felt something stirring inside her that she hadn't expected. It wasn't just admiration for what he had accomplished. It was a desire to continue his work. She had grown up on a frontier colony where everyone learned to shoot, where marksmanship wasn't just a sport but a survival skill. Before the war, she had been one of the best shots in her settlement, capable of hitting targets at ranges that impressed even the adults. But that had been years ago, and she had convinced herself that those skills were no longer relevant in a galaxy where humanity had been defeated. Now, surrounded by the evidence of one man's refusal to accept defeat, Alina began to reconsider everything she thought she knew about her own limitations. Morrison had reached 3,924 meters. He had challenged whoever found his equipment to push that record to 4,000 meters. It was only 76 meters further, less than the length of a city block. How hard could it be? The answer, she realized as she studied the complex calculations scrawled in the margins of Morrison's notebook, was that it would be nearly impossible. At 4 kilometers, she would need to account for wind patterns, atmospheric pressure, the planet's rotation, even the gravitational effects of Kepler 442b's 3 moons. The mathematics alone were daunting, requiring a level of precision that pushed the boundaries of both human skill and technology. But as Alina packed Morrison's equipment alongside her collection of spent shells, she found herself thinking not about the impossibility of the challenge, but about the opportunity it represented. Somewhere out there, beyond the range of conventional weapons, targets still moved. The war might be officially over, but alien patrol groups still crossed this world, convinced that humans no longer posed a threat at long range. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. Alina spent the next 3 days studying Morrison's equipment and notes with an intensity that surprised her. She had moved her camp to a ridge overlooking the valley where she had found the sniper's nest, far enough from the main scrapyard to avoid detection by other scavengers, but close enough to return for supplies when needed. The location offered excellent visibility across the former battlefield, with clear lines of sight extending to the horizon. Morrison's notebook was a masterwork of applied ballistics, filled with calculations, wind charts, and atmospheric data that he had painstakingly collected during his months on Kepler 442b. But it was more than just technical information. It was a record of a man's determination to push beyond accepted limitations. Each page revealed new insights into how he had achieved his impossible shots. The key, Alina discovered, was not just the modified rifle or the alien range-finding technology. Morrison had created an entire system for long-range shooting that combined human marksmanship with salvaged alien equipment. A Zephyrian atmospheric scanner provided real-time weather data. A Vorthan gravity mapper helped calculate bullet drop over extreme distances. Even his ammunition had been customized, using alien materials to create rounds that maintained accuracy far beyond normal ranges. But reading about the system was one thing, learning to use it was another entirely. Alina's first attempts at long-range shooting were humbling reminders of how much skill Morrison must have possessed. Targets that looked easy to hit at 500 meters became invisible specks at 2,000 meters. Wind patterns that barely affected close-range shots became crucial variables that could send a bullet meters off target at extreme distance. She started with Morrison's practice routine, setting up targets at progressively longer ranges and working her way up from 1,000 meters. The rifle felt different each time she fired it, as if the alien enhancements were learning her shooting style and adapting to compensate for her techniques. By the 3rd day, she was consistently hitting targets at 2,500 meters, but the jump from there to 4,000 meters seemed impossible. That evening, as Alina cleaned the rifle and reviewed Morrison's notes by lamplight, she made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the back pages of his notebook was a series of observations about alien patrol patterns. Morrison hadn't just been practicing his shooting. He had been conducting surveillance of enemy movements, tracking groups that believed they were safely beyond human weapons range. The patrols followed predictable routes, crossing a series of ridges approximately 3,800 meters from Alina's current position. Morrison had been planning something when he died, building toward a shot that would demonstrate to the aliens that nowhere was truly safe from human determination. Now Alina found herself in a position to complete what he had started. She spent hours studying his observations, learning to identify the subtle signs that indicated an alien patrol's approach. The Vorthan groups moved in tight formations, their energy shields creating distinctive distortions in the air that could be spotted through Morrison's enhanced scope. The Zephyrians were more scattered, but followed precise timing schedules, appearing at specific locations with mechanical regularity. As dawn approached, Alina found herself thinking about more than just the technical challenge of making an impossible shot. Morrison's notes revealed a deeper truth about the war that had ended on Kepler 442b. Humanity had been defeated not because they lacked courage or skill, but because they had accepted the enemy's assumptions about what was possible. The aliens had calculated human weapon ranges, established safe zones beyond those distances, and conducted their operations with the confidence that came from superior technology. But they had never accounted for human adaptability, for the species' refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. Morrison had proven that humans could take alien technology and use it in ways its creators never imagined. Now Alina had the opportunity to build on his work, to send a message that would reach far beyond this abandoned battlefield. At first light, she began preparing for her attempt at the 4,000-meter shot. Morrison's notes indicated that the optimal time for long-range shooting on Kepler 442b was during the early morning hours, when atmospheric conditions were most stable, and the planet's complex wind patterns were at their most predictable. She had perhaps a 3-hour window before conditions would become too variable for extreme precision shooting. Alina set up the rifle in Morrison's original position, making minor adjustments based on her own shooting style and the current atmospheric readings. The alien rangefinder confirmed that the ridge where patrols typically appeared was exactly 3,987 meters away, close enough to Morrison's 4,000-meter goal to qualify as achieving his challenge. But Alina found herself thinking bigger, scanning for positions that would require an even longer shot. Approximately 4,200 meters distant, she spotted a communications relay that the aliens still used to coordinate their remaining operations on Kepler 442b. It was heavily shielded and had withstood numerous human attacks during the war, but Morrison's notes suggested that its main power coupling was vulnerable to precision fire. A single shot in exactly the right location could disable the entire facility, cutting alien communications across this sector of the planet. The mathematics were daunting. At 4,200 meters, Alina would need to account for a bullet drop of over 15 meters, wind drift that could vary by several meters depending on conditions at different altitudes, and the complex gravitational effects of 3 moons that were all in different phases of their orbital cycles. The margin for error was so small that even breathing at the wrong moment could cause a miss. But as Alina studied the target through Morrison's scope, she began to see not just the impossibility of the shot, but the elegance of the challenge it represented. This wasn't just about hitting a distant target. It was about proving that human ingenuity could overcome any limitation, that the combination of skill, determination, and adaptive technology could achieve what others considered impossible. She began making her final calculations, cross-referencing Morrison's data with current conditions and adjusting for variables that he had never encountered. The alien relay would be active for communications checks in approximately 2 hours, presenting a brief window when the facility's shields would be lowered for routine maintenance. Alina realized she had moved beyond simply trying to match Morrison's achievement. She was about to attempt something that would establish a new standard for human marksmanship, a shot that would be remembered long after the last spent shell had been collected from this battlefield. If she succeeded, she would prove that even in defeat, humanity remained capable of surprises that their enemies could never anticipate. As she settled into position and began her final preparations, Alina felt the weight of more than just Morrison's rifle in her hands. She carried the expectations of a species that had never learned when to quit, the hopes of everyone who believed that humans could accomplish anything they set their minds to achieving. In a few hours, one way or another, she would know if that faith was justified. The next 90 minutes passed with agonizing slowness as Alina fine-tuned every aspect of her equipment and calculations. Morrison's rifle felt like a natural extension of her body now, its alien enhancements responding to her movements with increasing precision. The Vorthen rangefinder provided constant updates on atmospheric conditions, while the Zephyrian weather scanner tracked wind patterns at multiple altitudes along the bullet's projected path. At 4,200 meters, Alina's target was barely visible even through the enhanced scope. The alien communications relay appeared as little more than a metallic glint against the distant ridge, its power coupling hidden beneath layers of adaptive armor that could deflect most conventional weapons. But Morrison's notes had identified a weakness, a gap in the shielding where cooling vents created a vulnerability no larger than a dinner plate. Alina had never attempted a shot requiring this level of precision. During her youth on the frontier colony, hitting a target the size of a person at 800 meters had been considered exceptional marksmanship. Now, she was preparing to hit something smaller than her fist at more than 5 times that distance. The mathematics alone were staggering. Her bullet would need to travel for over 6 seconds, dropping more than 15 meters due to gravity while fighting wind currents that could push it several meters off course. As the time approached for her shot, Alina found herself thinking about the spent shells in her backpack, each one representing a moment when a human had refused to accept defeat. The brass casings from Morrison's position told the story of a man who had pushed beyond every accepted limitation, who had turned the enemy's own technology against them in ways its creators never imagined. Now she had the opportunity to add her own casing to that collection, to prove that Morrison's work could be continued and improved upon. The alien communications relay began its scheduled maintenance cycle exactly on time. Alina watched through her scope as defensive shields powered down and cooling vents opened to release the heat generated by the facility's massive processors. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the shields would reactivate, 30 seconds to make a shot that would require everything she had learned from Morrison's notes and equipment. Alina controlled her breathing, settling into the rhythm that Morrison had described in his journal. Each breath brought her heart rate down. Each exhale steadied her aim until the crosshairs aligned perfectly with the tiny target 4,200 meters away. The rifle's alien components hummed softly as they calculated final adjustments for wind, gravity, and atmospheric pressure. At the moment of perfect stillness between heartbeats, Alina squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the valley like thunder, but Alina barely heard it. Her attention was focused entirely on the scope, tracking the bullet's path across the impossible distance separating her from the target. 6.3 seconds stretched into an eternity as she watched and waited, knowing that everything depended on calculations made in the minutes before she fired. The impact was smaller than she had expected, little more than a brief flash of light against the distant relay. For a moment, Alina thought she had missed entirely. Then the facility's power grid began to fluctuate, and she realized that her bullet had found its mark. The tiny power coupling that controlled the relay's main systems had been severed by a single shot fired from over 4 kilometers away. Alina watched in amazement as the communications facility went dark, its defensive systems failing as power cascaded through damaged circuits. Emergency lights flickered on briefly before dying as well, leaving the relay completely disabled. In a single shot, she had accomplished what entire assault teams had failed to achieve during the war. But her celebration was cut short by movement in her peripheral vision. Through the scope, Alina could see alien figures emerging from hidden positions around the relay, scanning the horizon for the source of the attack. They moved with the mechanical precision of professional soldiers, but Alina could sense their confusion. According to their intelligence, no human weapons could reach their position from any direction. Alina began packing Morrison's equipment with practiced efficiency, knowing that the aliens would soon triangulate the source of her shot. But as she prepared to leave the sniper's nest, she noticed something that made her pause. New movement was visible through the scope, not just the original patrol, but reinforcements converging on the area from multiple directions. The aliens were not just investigating her attack. They were responding with overwhelming force to what they clearly saw as a significant threat. Alina counted at least 30 enemy soldiers moving toward her position, supported by anti-aircraft drones and heavy weapons platforms. They were treating her single shot as the opening move in a major human offensive. As Alina watched the alien response unfold, she began to understand the true significance of what she had accomplished. Morrison's 4,000-meter challenge hadn't just been about marksmanship. It had been about psychological warfare on a strategic level. By demonstrating that humans could strike at targets the aliens considered safely beyond reach, she had forced them to recalculate their entire defensive strategy. The implications were staggering. Every alien installation on Kepler 442b would now need to be repositioned to account for the possibility of human attack from previously impossible ranges. Supply convoys would need to alter their routes. Patrol patterns would require complete revision. With a single shot, Alina had forced the alien occupation force to acknowledge that nowhere on the planet was truly safe from human retaliation. But more importantly, she had proven that Morrison's work could be continued and expanded upon. The rifle in her hands represented more than just advanced weapons technology. It was a symbol of human adaptability, of the species' refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. Even in defeat, humans remained capable of innovation and surprised that their enemies couldn't predict or counter. Alina carefully ejected the spent casing from her shot and added it to her collection. Unlike Morrison's casings, which were marked with distances, she engraved this one with coordinates, the exact position of the communications relay she had disabled. Future collectors would understand what this shell represented, proof that humans could adapt alien technology to achieve the impossible. As she prepared to leave the area, Alina found herself thinking beyond just this single shot. Morrison's notes contained references to other targets, other challenges that pushed the boundaries of what human weapons could achieve. The 4,000-meter barrier had been broken, but there were longer ranges to explore, more difficult shots to attempt. She thought about the spent shells she had been collecting for months, each one representing a moment of human defiance against impossible odds. Now she had begun creating her own collection, marking achievements that would inspire future generations of human sharpshooters. The war on Kepler 442b might be officially over, but Alina had just opened a new chapter in the ongoing conflict between human determination and alien assumptions about what was possible. As she moved away from Morrison's position with all his equipment carefully packed, Alina noticed that the aliens were still converging on the area where they believed the shot had originated. They would find the abandoned sniper's nest eventually, but by then she would be kilometers away, already planning her next impossible target. For the first time since arriving on Kepler 442b, Alina felt like she was doing more than just collecting the remnants of other people's courage. She was continuing their work, pushing beyond the boundaries they had established, proving that human potential was limited only by imagination and determination. Morrison's challenge had been met and exceeded, but Alina was already thinking about the next milestone, perhaps 5,000 meters, perhaps something even more ambitious. The war might be over, but the collection was just beginning. 3 weeks after disabling the communications relay, Alina had become something the aliens had never encountered before, a ghost that could reach out and touch them from distances they considered impossible. Her collection of spent shells had grown beyond Morrison's original casings to include her own achievements. 4,200 meters, 4,847 meters, and just yesterday, a shot that had reached 5,390 meters to disable a Zephyrian transport convoy. But success had brought unexpected consequences. The alien presence on Kepler 442b had evolved from a routine occupation force into a dedicated hunter-killer operation focused entirely on finding and eliminating what their reports described as the Phantom Sniper. Alina had intercepted enough of their communications to understand that her activities had attracted attention far beyond this single world. The aliens had begun bringing in specialists, Vorthan trackers capable of following energy signatures across vast distances, Zephyrian counter-snipers equipped with weapons that could theoretically match her range, and most troubling of all, human collaborators who understood how their own species thought and fought. Alina realized that her war of precision and patience was about to become something much more dangerous and immediate. She had established a new base of operations in the ruins of a human mining facility, choosing the location for its extensive underground tunnels and multiple escape routes. Morrison's equipment had been supplemented with additional alien technology salvaged from her targets, creating a weapons system that pushed far beyond what either species had originally designed. The rifle now incorporated targeting computers from 3 different alien civilizations, each one modified to work in harmony with human marksmanship techniques. Alina's daily routine had evolved into something that would have been unrecognizable to her former self. Each morning began with atmospheric analysis and target assessment, identifying alien positions that could be engaged from extreme range. She had learned to think in terms of strategic impact rather than simple marksmanship, choosing targets that would force the aliens to dedicate resources to defending positions they had never considered vulnerable. The psychological effects of her campaign were becoming apparent in alien communications traffic. Patrol units reported constant anxiety about operating in open terrain. Supply convoys had begun taking circuitous routes that added days to their travel time. Most significantly, the aliens had started positioning their installations with the assumption that humans could engage targets at ranges exceeding 6 kilometers. But Alina's most important discovery had nothing to do with marksmanship or technology. Hidden in Morrison's notes was a reference to other human snipers who had been operating independently across the galaxy, using similar techniques to adapt alien technology for extreme-range shooting. Morrison had been part of an informal network of specialists who shared information and techniques, pushing each other to achieve ever greater ranges and precision. The network still existed. Alina had managed to make contact with other survivors through encrypted channels that the aliens hadn't yet learned to monitor. There was Sarah Chen on Proxima Centauri B, who had achieved a 7,200-meter shot using a hybrid weapon that combined human engineering with captured Vorthan gravity manipulation technology. Marcus Petrosky on Wolf 359C had developed ammunition that could adjust its trajectory mid-flight, allowing for course corrections that enabled shots at previously impossible ranges. Most remarkably, the network was growing. News of Alina's achievements on Kepler 442b had inspired other humans to begin experimenting with extreme-range marksmanship. Young scavengers and veterans alike were discovering that the combination of human determination and adapted alien technology could create possibilities that no military strategist had ever considered. Alina found herself becoming not just a sniper, but a teacher and coordinator. Through carefully encrypted communications, she shared Morrison's techniques and her own innovations with humans across dozens of worlds. Each success story that filtered back through the network represented another proof that humanity's defeat in the formal war had not ended their capacity for effective resistance. The aliens were beginning to understand this as well. Alina's intercepted communications revealed growing concern among occupation forces about what they termed the long-range phenomenon. Military analysts were struggling to develop countermeasures against an enemy that could strike from distances that rendered most defensive systems ineffective. But the enemy's response was escalating beyond mere defensive measures. Alina's morning reconnaissance revealed a new development that changed everything about her situation. A massive alien battleship had entered orbit around Kepler 442b, carrying what appeared to be a full battalion of specialists dedicated to hunting human snipers. The ship's energy signatures indicated weapons systems capable of orbital bombardment with pinpoint accuracy. Alina realized that her success had drawn attention from forces far beyond the local occupation. The aliens were no longer treating her as a nuisance to be eliminated by local security forces. They had classified her activities as a strategic threat, requiring overwhelming response. The informal network of human snipers had become significant enough to warrant military assets that had previously been reserved for major combat operations. The implications were both terrifying and exciting. Alina had helped prove that humans could continue fighting effectively even after conventional military defeat, using innovation and determination to turn enemy technology against its creators. But this success had also marked her, and others like her, as priority targets for elimination by forces that possessed overwhelming technological advantages. As Alina studied the alien battleship through her enhanced scope, she began to develop a plan that would have seemed insane just weeks earlier. The ship's main communication array was positioned in a way that made it theoretically vulnerable to ground-based fire, but only from a range that exceeded anything she had previously attempted. The distance was approximately 8,900 meters, nearly 9 kilometers of vertical shot through atmosphere and gravitational fields that would challenge every system Morrison had developed. But more importantly, the shot would be impossible to trace back to its source. The battleship sensors were designed to detect threats from other spacecraft, not ground-based weapons operating at extreme range. If Alina could successfully engage the communication array, she would not only cripple the alien hunter-killer operation, but also demonstrate that human ingenuity could reach anywhere the enemy considered safe. Alina spent the rest of the day preparing for what might be her final shot on Kepler 442b. Whether she succeeded or failed, the alien response would make her current position untenable. But the network Morrison had started was now large enough to survive the loss of any individual member, and Alina's techniques and equipment could be replicated by others who would continue pushing the boundaries of what humans could achieve. As night fell over the abandoned battlefield where she had first found Morrison's equipment, Alina prepared to attempt a shot that would either establish a new milestone for human marksmanship or serve as her final contribution to the growing resistance. Either way, she would add another spent shell to her collection, one marked not with distance, but with the coordinates of an alien battleship that had learned too late that nowhere was beyond the reach of human determination. The war might be officially over, but Alina had helped prove that defeat was only a temporary setback for a species that refused to accept limitations imposed by others. Tomorrow, across dozens of worlds, other humans would be preparing their own impossible shots, carrying on Morrison's legacy and pushing toward ranges that would make even today's achievements seem modest by comparison. Alina spent the entire night preparing for what she privately called the impossible shot. At 8,900 meters, targeting the alien battleship's communication array would require every technique Morrison had developed and several that Alina had been forced to innovate herself. The mathematics were so complex that she had filled an entire notebook with calculations, cross-referencing atmospheric data, gravitational effects, and orbital mechanics that changed by the minute. The alien battleship maintained a geosynchronous position above the planet's main continent, its massive bulk visible even to the naked eye as it caught the light of Kepler 442b's twin suns. Through her enhanced scope, Alina could make out individual details of the ship's construction weapon ports that could rain destruction across entire continents, shield generators that could deflect massive energy blasts, and most importantly, the delicate communication array that coordinated the vessel's operations. Alina had modified Morrison's rifle extensively for this shot, incorporating power cells from a Vorthan energy weapon to boost the projectile's velocity and adding a microcomputer that could calculate real-time adjustments during the bullet's flight. The ammunition itself was her own creation, crafted from materials salvaged across the battlefield, and designed to maintain coherence and accuracy through nearly 9 kilometers of atmospheric interference. As dawn approached, Alina took her position in a location she had prepared over the past week. The firing point was carved into the natural rock formation of a mountain peak, giving her the elevation needed for the extreme-range shot while providing some protection from the inevitable retaliation. If she succeeded, the aliens would saturate this entire region with orbital bombardment within minutes. Alina had accepted that this would likely be her final shot on Kepler 442b. But the network Morrison had started was now operating across dozens of worlds, and Alina's techniques were being replicated by humans who would continue pushing the boundaries of long-range marksmanship. Whether she survived today's attempt or not, the work would continue. Through her scope, Alina watched the battleship's daily routine unfold with mechanical precision. The communication array rotated through its standard configuration checks, presenting brief windows of vulnerability when its main components were aligned for maintenance procedures. She had perhaps 30 seconds when the array would be in the optimal position for her shot. The calculations were staggering. At 8,900 meters, Alina's bullet would need to travel for nearly 12 seconds, fighting gravitational effects from 3 moons, atmospheric pressure variations, and wind currents at multiple altitudes. The target itself was smaller than a vehicle, requiring precision that pushed beyond the limits of both human capability and alien technology. But as Alina settled into her final shooting position, she thought about more than just the technical challenge ahead. In her backpack were nearly 200 spent shells, each one representing a moment when a human had refused to accept defeat. Morrison's original collection had told the story of one man's determination to exceed every limitation. Alina's additions chronicled her own journey from scavenger to sniper, marking achievements that would have been considered impossible just months earlier. Now she prepared to add what might be the final shell to her collection, one that would represent not just extreme marksmanship, but humanity's refusal to surrender even when facing overwhelming technological superiority. If she could hit a target nearly 9 kilometers away, she would prove that human ingenuity could reach anywhere in the galaxy. The moment arrived with perfect clarity. Elena's breathing steadied, her heart rate dropped, and the crosshairs aligned with the distant communication array as it rotated into the optimal position. Every system Morrison had designed, and she had enhanced, confirmed the same calculations. This shot was theoretically possible, requiring only perfect execution at the moment of opportunity. Elena squeezed the trigger. The rifle's enhanced systems discharged with a sound like controlled thunder, sending a projectile arcing across impossible distances toward the alien battleship. Elena tracked the bullet's path through her scope, watching as it climbed through the atmosphere on a trajectory that would either make history or serve as her final defiant gesture. 11.8 seconds after she fired, Elena witnessed something that would be discussed in human military academies for generations to come. Her bullet struck the battleship's communication array with pinpoint precision, triggering a cascade failure that rippled through the vessel's entire command structure. The massive ship, which had been positioned to coordinate a planet-wide manhunt, went dark as its primary systems lost communication with each other. But Elena barely had time to appreciate her success before the inevitable retaliation began. The battleship's automated defense systems, operating on backup protocols, began saturating her firing position with energy beams that turned solid rock into molten slag. Elena had anticipated this response and was already moving through escape routes she had prepared, but the aliens' response exceeded even her worst-case scenarios. As she moved through underground tunnels while the mountain above her was systematically destroyed, Elena realized that her shot had accomplished something beyond its immediate tactical impact. The aliens' massive overreaction revealed the true significance of what the human sniper network had achieved. By proving that humans could strike targets at previously impossible ranges, Elena and others like her had forced an entire galactic civilization to acknowledge that their technological superiority was not absolute. Elena emerged from her tunnels kilometers away from her firing position, which now resembled the surface of a volcanic moon. The alien battleship hung motionless in orbit, its communication systems still dark hours after her shot. Even with their overwhelming firepower, the aliens could not undo what Elena had accomplished or prevent others from following her example. Over the following weeks, as Elena made her way off Kepler 442b aboard a refugee transport, reports filtered in from across the galaxy that confirmed the broader impact of her achievements. Human snipers on dozens of worlds had begun attempting their own extreme-range shots, many succeeding at distances that surpassed even Elena's record. The informal network that Morrison had started was becoming a galaxy-wide phenomenon that alien military strategists struggled to counter. Years later, Elena's collection of spent shells would be displayed in the Museum of Human Resistance on New Geneva, each casing telling part of the story of how a defeated species had refused to accept the limitations imposed by their conquerors. Morrison's original shells marked the beginning of humanity's adaptation to alien technology. Elena's additions chronicled the evolution of that adaptation into a form of warfare that their enemies could not predict or prevent. But the centerpiece of the collection was not Elena's record-breaking 8,900-meter shot, impressive though it was. Instead, visitors were drawn to a simple brass casing marked only with Morrison's original challenge, 4,000 meters. It was a reminder that the most important human achievements began not with grand ambitions, but with simple refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from a young woman who had started by collecting spent shells and ended by proving that human determination could not be contained by any technology or overwhelmed by any force. As long as humans survived, they would continue finding ways to exceed every limitation their enemies believed absolute. Elena's legacy was not just the records she had set or the alien installations she had destroyed. It was the proof that Morrison's challenge, to reach 4,000 meters, had been only the beginning of what humans could achieve when they refused to accept defeat. The collection of spent shells had become a symbol of something that alien strategists were still struggling to understand. That for humans, every ending was simply the start of a new challenge to overcome. In the end, Elena had proven that she was never just collecting spent shells. She had been gathering evidence of humanity's greatest strength, the absolute refusal to quit, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. And across the galaxy, that strength continued to manifest in new and unexpected ways that would challenge alien assumptions for generations to come.